August 9th, 1969, Los Angeles. 5 bodies were discovered at the home of Roman Polanski, including his pregnant wife, Sharon Tate, who was clad in a bikini nightgown. The details were gruesome and shocking. A cord tied around her neck, connecting her to another victim, multiple stab wounds and bullets filling the ceilings. At first, the police only revealed a small portion of the horrifying scene, but as more information surfaced, Hollywood was left in terror. We're suddenly hiring extra bodyguards and fearing for their lives. And then came the bombshell that would forever change the course of history. Sharon's death was linked to a cult leader named Charles Manson. The media frenzy surrounding Sharon Tate's death was at an all-time high, with rumors and speculation running rampant. Some pointed fingers at a caretaker for the property, while others whispered about sex, drugs, and witchcraft cults that had ties to the offbeat Hollywood crowd. But as more bodies were discovered in a carbon copy crime scene, it became clear that this was no random act of violence. It was a calculated and heinous murder. Now, after 50 years, we know the truth behind what really happened that night and how it brought an end to the utopian idealism of the 1960s. To fully unravel the mystery of Sharon Tate's death, we have to go back even further to Beach Boys drummer Dennis Wilson. It was through him that Manson and his family became intertwined with the world of Hollywood, ultimately leading to the tragic events of August 9th. Dennis Wilson was living a dream life as the drummer for the Beach Boys, one of the biggest bands in America at the time. But behind the scenes, his life was far from perfect. He struggled with addiction and mental health issues and often found solace in the company of strangers. And that's how he came across 2 hitchhiking women in the summer of 1968, Patricia Krenwinkel and Susan Atkins. They were members of Manson's family, a group of young people who had abandoned the traditional norms of society to follow their self-proclaimed guru, Charles Manson. As Dennis Wilson became more intrigued by Manson's philosophies and music, he introduced him to his brother Brian Wilson, the genius behind the Beach Boys' hit songs. Together with the rest of the band, they recorded hours of Manson songs, but only one made it onto their album, Never Learn Not to Love. But as Manson's hold over Dennis Wilson grew stronger, so did his influence in Hollywood. He was introduced to record producer Terry Melcher, who had worked with big names like The Byrds and would later co-write the Beach Boys' hit Kokomo in the 1980s. It was through Melcher that Manson and his followers were able to rent a house on CeeLo Drive, owned by Melcher's friend and actress Candice Bergen. The plan was for Melcher to produce Manson's music and potentially even make a documentary about him and his family. But things quickly turned sour between Manson and both Wilson and Melcher. Wilson changed the lyrics of Manson's song without his consent, causing tension between them, and Melcher failed to fulfill his promises of producing Manson's music, leading him to feel betrayed. This betrayal, coupled with Manson's erratic behavior, led to a falling out between him and Wilson. In a fit of rage, Manson showed Wilson a bullet and uttered chilling words that would foreshadow what was to come. Every time you look at it, I want you to think how nice it is your kids are still safe. Wilson retaliated by beating Manson up and kicking him out of his house. But this only fueled Manson's anger and resentment towards Hollywood's elite. Manson was not one to take rejection lightly. He had become increasingly paranoid and angry, feeling betrayed by Wilson and Melcher, who had promised him success in the music industry. And when Manson learned that Melcher no longer lived at 10050 CeeLo Drive, the location of Sharon Tate's murder, he saw it as a perfect opportunity for revenge. Manson's family included members like Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Tex Watson. On the night of August 9th, they were sent to the house on CeeLo Drive with specific instructions: totally destroy everyone in it, as gruesomely as you can, to instill fear into Terry Melcher for not following through on his promises. But as fate would have it, Melcher no longer lived at that house. It was now occupied by Roman Polanski and his pregnant wife, Sharon Tate. As the group headed towards 10050 CeeLo Drive, they had no idea what lay ahead of them. They were just following orders from their leader, a man who had been spewing violent rhetoric and manipulating vulnerable young people with promises of love and acceptance. Meanwhile, Sharon Tate was hosting a small dinner party with friends Jay Sebring, Wojciech Frykowski, and Abigail Folger. As they dined inside the house, the Manson family arrived at the gates of 10050 CeeLo Drive. Watson cut the phone line to the house, ensuring that no one inside could call for help. Then, as they entered the grounds, they saw headlights coming towards them. A guy named Stephen Parent, a friend of the property's caretaker, was visiting and had parked his car near the gates. Watson approached him, aiming a gun at Parent as he begged for his life. But Watson didn't hesitate. He shot Parent 4 times, leaving him dead in his vehicle. With their first victim out of the way, they headed towards the house where Sebring and Frykowski were sleeping in the living room while Tate and Folger were in other parts of the house. Watson, along with 2 of the women, entered through a window. Kasabian kept watch outside by the gates. Frykowski was woken up by a kick to the head and asked Watson what he was doing in their house. Watson's chilling reply, "I'm the devil, and I'm here to do the devil's business." The 3 others were then dragged into the living room and tied up. Tate and Sebring were tied together by their necks with a rope hanging them from one of the ceiling beams. Sebring protested the rough treatment of his pregnant friend, but it fell on deaf ears. Watson shot him and then stabbed him multiple times. Folger was ordered to get her purse from one of the bedrooms, which contained $70. But as Watson was distracted by Sebring's groanings in the living room, he left Folger alone and came back to finish Sebring off with more stabbings. Kasabian had been drawn towards the house by the chaos. She ran down the driveway, trying to stop what was happening, but it was too late. Frykowski had managed to partially free himself from his restraints and tried to fight back against Atkins. He even made it outside onto the front lawn, where he met Kasabian, who saw him covered in blood and begged him for forgiveness. But before he could respond, Watson came and hit him with the butt of his gun, stabbing him multiple times until he was no longer breathing. As the killers went back inside, Kasabian ran down to the car parked by the gates and started it. But she couldn't leave her 2-year-old daughter, who was with Manson and the rest of the family at the ranch. So she abandoned the car and headed back towards the house, where she witnessed even more horrors. Tate had been repeatedly stabbed, and her unborn child had been brutally cut out of her body. The killers then wrote "pig" in Tate's blood on the front door as a message to Melcher, who was not even present at the house. They discarded their bloody clothes and fled back to their ranch, feeling victorious in their twisted revenge plot. The next morning, around 8:30 a.m., Mrs. Winifred Chapman, a maid, arrived at the house to start her work. Instead, she encountered a horrifying sight. Bodies scattered on the lawn and inside the house. She immediately ran to a neighbor's house, crying and screaming for help. The neighbor, Jim Assam, a 15-year-old boy, called the police, who arrived shortly after. The police cautiously entered the property, armed and unsure of what awaited them. They heard a dog barking from behind a guest house and a man's voice telling it to be quiet. It was William Garrettson, the 19-year-old caretaker. Garrettson claimed to have slept through the night despite the gunshots and chaos nearby. The police were suspicious, but couldn't find evidence linking him to the murders. The police then focused on the main house, where they discovered a gruesome scene that would haunt them for years. The victims had been brutally beaten and stabbed multiple times. Their bodies were partially undressed, suggesting a possible sexual aspect to the crime. "Pig" was written in blood on the front door, along with other cryptic messages on the walls. The police searched for clues or evidence that could lead them to the killer. They found a gun holster, but no weapon. The telephone lines were cut, preventing calls for help. Pieces of a broken handgun grip were also left behind, indicating the possibility of multiple weapons used. The police also had to piece together a timeline of events leading up to the murders. They conducted interviews with friends and acquaintances of the victims, as well as with neighbors who may have heard or seen something on the night of the murders. The investigation quickly led them to the offbeat Hollywood crowd that Tate and Polanski were a part of. Rumors began to swirl about a possible connection to sex, drugs, and witchcraft cults, adding to the sensationalism surrounding the case. Within days, 2 more bodies were discovered at a separate location, the home of Leno and Rosemary LaBianca. They had also been brutally murdered in a similar manner, with messages left on the walls in their blood. The words "death to pigs" and "helter skelter" were found written on the walls, leading police to believe that these murders were connected to the ones at Tate's house. The words were misspelled, adding to the bizarre and unsettling nature of the crimes. The police received a breakthrough in the case when a young boy stumbled upon a hidden gun beneath a bush near his home. Little did he know this discovery would connect to the infamous Tate murders. Acting swiftly, the boy's father handed over the firearm to the authorities, hoping for a thorough investigation. However, the police failed to fully delve into the matter. The gun's trail led them to a man named William Vance Bell, who had sold it to Bernard Lotsa Papa Crow. Crow, in turn, passed it on to Donald Shorty Shea. As the investigation progressed, it unveiled a web of connections to Spahn Ranch, a movie set that Charles Manson and his followers called home. It was there that Donald Shorty Shea had been working as a ranch hand before mysteriously disappearing. Armed with this newfound information, the police confronted Manson and his followers at Spahn Ranch on August 16, 1969. However, instead of cooperation, they were met with hostility and resistance from the family members. Nonetheless, the accumulation of evidence and witness statements started to build a compelling case. Susan Atkins, one of the family members who had been arrested on an unrelated charge, began to boast about her involvement in the Tate murders to her cellmate. Word of this confession eventually reached the authorities. In November of 1969, Susan Atkins pointed the finger at Charles Manson as the mastermind behind the gruesome crimes. She also disclosed a list of other celebrities targeted by the family for assassination, including Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton. On December 2, 1969, Charles Manson and several members of his family were arrested on unrelated charges. The police did not have enough evidence to charge them with the Tate LaBianca murders, but they were able to keep them in custody while they continued their investigation. The trial for the Tate LaBianca murders began on July 24, 1970. Vincent Bugliosi, the prosecutor assigned to the case, had a wealth of evidence and witness statements linking Manson and his followers to the crimes. One key witness was Linda Kasabian, who had been present at both the Tate and LaBianca homes on the night of the murders. In exchange for immunity, she agreed to testify against Manson and his followers. The trial was a media circus with daily updates and coverage in newspapers and television. The gruesome details of the murders captivated the public's attention, along with Manson's bizarre behavior and beliefs. During the trial, it was revealed that Manson had a twisted and apocalyptic vision known as Helter Skelter. He believed that a race war between blacks and whites was imminent, and his followers were preparing for this by committing the murders. On January 15, 1971, Vincent Bugliosi delivered his closing argument to the jury. He painted a clear picture of Manson's control over his followers and their willingness to obey his every command, even if it meant committing murder. The jury deliberated for 9 days before reaching a verdict. On January 25, 1971, all 4 defendants, Manson, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Leslie Van Houten, were found guilty of first-degree murder. The trial then moved to the penalty phase, where the jury had to decide if the defendants would receive the death penalty or life in prison. On March 29, 1971, they decided on a death sentence for all 4 defendants. But this was not the end of Manson's legal battles. In February 1972, a California Supreme Court ruling declared the death penalty unconstitutional, which automatically reduced Manson's sentence to life in prison. Manson was initially sent to Folsom Prison, but he was later transferred to Vacaville Prison. In 1984, he was set on fire by a fellow inmate who believed God told him to kill Manson. He suffered severe burns, but survived. In 1989, Manson was transferred to Corcoran Prison, where he remained until his death in 2017 at the age of 83. Despite numerous parole hearings, he was never released and spent over 46 years in prison. The Sharon Tate and LaBianca murders shocked the nation and forever changed Hollywood. The case became a symbol of the dark side of fame and the dangers of blind devotion to a charismatic leader. If you want to learn more about the Manson family and their infamous crimes, check out the documentary Helter Skelter or read Vincent Bugliosi's book of the same name. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more fascinating celebrity stories. See you on the next video.